I think we can start.
All right.
All right. So, Just Right Reader, all of you fabulous people out there, I'm Sarah Rich, and I'm the founder and CEO of Just Right Reader. And we do something that we love to do. I am sitting here with Florida Tortorelli, and we are going to talk third to fifth graders and how to support them as readers and what that looks like to give them exactly what they need in their reading strategies. Something that we believe deeply in at Just Right Reader is that we talk to researchers all the time. Like we talk to them, we're talking to Laura about our third to fifth grade high interest decodable chapter books, what we should do, what they should look like. We try and take that research right into our product. But something that we realized was that we shouldn't be talking to all of these researchers. We should be providing the time and space for them to share all of their knowledge and all of their best thinking with each of you, because you really are the people that want to hear about kind of what the research is and how do you impact it, how do you put it right into the classrooms and right into districts for kids. So Laura, we are so excited to have you. This is like our just kind of our happy spot as Just Right Reader is listening to researchers and tell us what they think is good for kids. So I hope that you will just enlighten us with all of your best and most fabulous knowledge and research.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I get to talk today about one of my favorite things, which is building multisyllabic decoding skills and why these are so important. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the problem. And the problem is that when we're talking about the science of reading, we're often talking about the science of beginning reading. We're talking about what kids need to get started, right? There's a lot of emphasis on alphabet knowledge, phonemic awareness, and phonics. And that's great for kids at the beginning of their reading journey, because kids are at first learning to read words on the page that they know in their oral language. So they're just they're seeing words for the first time, and they need to decode them and figure out what they are. But as kids grow and develop and read harder texts, they're actually starting to encounter words that they don't know yet and getting the opportunity to learn new vocabulary from reading. And that's really a different task than what little kids are doing. So it's not just little kids starting to read in kindergarten, first and second grade that need support with decoding and word reading. Actually, kids need support for decoding and word reading all the way through the elementary grade bands and even in secondary. Because the words that they are reading are quite different. They're not just longer, but they have different composition and different vocabulary challenges. So little kids start out decoding words like bat and ball. Then they progress to learning how to read what we call bisyllabic words, words like outside and under. But these words are still pretty familiar to them. But when kids hit third to fifth grade, they're starting to read lots and lots of text to learn about the world around them and encountering words like disorganization and equilibrium that not only look really long and scary, but also have new meanings that they may not have learned before reading that text. So recently, Freddie Hebert did an analysis of children's reading skills for the kids who score below basic on the National Assessment of Educational Progress in fourth grade in reading. And she identified that 80% of those kids who score at that below basic level are having difficulty reading multisyllabic words. Most of them can read single syllable words and high frequency words, but multisyllabic word reading is getting in the way of their reading fluency and comprehension and resulting in these low test scores. As you can see, most years that's about a third of kids nationwide, and it's been worse in the years since the pandemic. So this is a real issue for these older readers that prevents them from getting what they can out of reading. And if we analyze the texts that kids are asked to read in elementary school each year, they will encounter 20,000 new words in the books that they are expected to read each year in elementary school. So 20,000 new words that they've never seen in print before. 90% of those new words each year will be multisyllabic words, and 60 to 80% of those new words are going to be derived from other words. So what that means is that they are related, but not quite the same as other words that kids may have seen before. So for example, disobedience is derived from the word obey. So they need a lot of skills to figure out these new hard words that are coming at them in the text each year in elementary school, because usually those new unfamiliar words are carrying the meaning of the text. This is particularly true in informational texts. So here, for example, is a Just Right Reader text, a high interest decodable chapter book for older kids. And you'll see that to read and make sense of this text and really learn the information that kids are excited to learn at these ages, they need to be able to decode and figure out some proper nouns like Jupiter, compound words like spacecraft, content-specific words like hydrogen and helium from the science context, and derived words like ignited and voyager, which are derived forms of ignite and voyage. And so as kids grow up, start to read more interesting texts that allow them to learn about things that they're passionate about, they need strategies and information and instruction that's going to support them in figuring these words out. Unfortunately, we know if they don't get that instruction, they don't figure these words out on their own. Devin Kearns at the University of Connecticut has done research on what kids do, particularly struggling readers, when they come across words that they don't know, especially long words. And generally, they skip them. They pronounce the first few sounds and then just guess the rest. Sometimes they cut off the suffixes or make sort of like a wrong pronunciation and move on. And then they often use the context to guess the words. And that last one is like really a dagger in my heart, because we put so much effort into making sure little kids are not just guessing words and that they're sounding out each word by the letter by letter. But then if we don't continue that instructional support, when they get to long words, they just revert back to guessing. Here's some examples of substitutions that kids in these upper grades who are struggling with multisyllabic words might make while they're reading. For example, they might read mysterious as mystery, or justice as just ice, springtime as spring, beautiful as beetle, disappoint as disappear. So you can see how this would really impact your fluency and comprehension, and why your NAEP scores would be pretty low if you were doing things like this. Imagine trying to read a book about the Supreme Court, for example, but every time you come across the word justice, you read just ice. I mean, that's not even the same part of speech. It's going to throw off your ability to read fluently and to make sense of each sentence, let alone the text as a whole. And something that I've noticed anecdotally in my own research is once they have read one of these words incorrectly, they don't fix it up the next time it shows up in the text. They keep reading it wrong the same way all the way through. So here's an example of what this might feel like for a kid who didn't have these skills if they were continuing to read that Jupiter text. They might read giant as guy ant. As you can see, and they might read a couple of sentences like this. Jupiter is one of 4 gas giants in our solar system. Jupiter is master. It is twice as long as all the other planes combined. Astros think that Jupiter was the first plane to form in our solar system. So as you can see, if you were a kid reading that way, you would not feel motivated to keep going. You would not feel like you were a good reader. You would not want to answer a bunch of comprehension questions, and you would not feel like reading was something fun that you wanted to keep doing over the summer. And in fact, Wing and Sabatini and some other researchers at Educational Testing Service did a really interesting study where they followed a large cohort of 5th graders through the secondary grades to track their growth in word reading and comprehension. And what they found was that there's what they call the decoding threshold. If kids are able to read, decode multisyllabic words when they come across them in text by 5th grade, they are able to continue their reading growth and progress towards being proficient readers after 5th grade in the secondary grades. But if they are not able to do that by the end of 5th grade, they tend to be stagnant in their reading comprehension in the subsequent years. So they aren't able to continue to grow in their reading comprehension unless they can start to dig in and read those multisyllabic words. And they found that 38% of kids in 5th grade were not meeting that threshold. And so that really is going to impede their ability to read for fun, learn new things, and progress through the grades successfully. And what we find is that there's tons and tons of research that supports teaching kids specific skills and information for multisyllabic decoding. And that when we do that, it can support word recognition, reading fluency, and reading confidence. So to think about how we can best do this, I want to just do a little snapshot on how kids learn to read words. I'm sure this is not new information for anyone, but when we think about some of the key researchers that have established the science of reading, Perfetti and Hart, Linnea Airy, what they show us is that kids don't just need to learn how the word is spelled and how to pronounce it, although that is 2 things that they need to learn about a word. But they also need to learn. They also need to learn that all the meanings that are associated with a particular word. So if a kid, for example, is learning the word rock, which seems like a very straightforward, simple word, they do need to know that it has 3 sounds, r, k, and that it has 4 letters to represent those 3 sounds, because the CK represents that final sound, but that final k sound. But they also need to know all of the meanings that can be associated with this word. For example, it can mean a stone, a back and forth motion, or a type of music. And in addition, they need to be able to recognize that word rock and the appropriate meaning associated with it in derived forms of the word. So if they see the word rocks or rocking or bedrock, that they are able to connect it to that meaning. So it's important for kids to pay attention to the letters and the sounds in the words and how they're pronounced, but also to read them in meaningful context and make sense of the words as they're reading them. And that's something that really shows up as important in multisyllabic decoding, because, as I said before, many of the multisyllabic words kids encounter in texts are words that they're new vocabulary words that they're learning for the first time. So there are 3 clear recommendations from the research that can support this work and help kids get over that decoding threshold and keep making progress in their reading and stay motivated in the upper grades. The first is to teach syllables and morphemes, and I'll dig into that a little bit more, explain what that means. And the second is to teach a routine for decoding multisyllabic words during reading, when they're reading actual text. And the third is to use text sets to increase opportunities for word learning. So the first recommendation is teach syllables and morphemes. When we first are teaching kids in that beginning phase how to read, they need to learn all kinds of word parts, right? They need to learn short vowels, long vowels, vowel consonant E patterns, vowel teams, R-controlled vowels, etc. All of those word parts are still important for multisyllabic words. You can see the same word parts showing up in cake and mistake, in toy and destroy, in car and personable. You'll see that these parts will continue to be useful. So if all kids need a good firm foundation in general decoding skills. But when kids reach this upper grade level, they also need some instruction in common syllables and common morphemes. So syllables are syllables that appear again and again in words, like burr in member, remember, November, and berate. Morphemes are meaningful word parts like prefixes and suffixes that appear again over and over again in words like readable, reasonable, acceptable, and disposable. Both of these pieces should be explicitly taught, just like we teach kids vowel teams and diphthongs, in order to support this multisyllabic decoding. And what research shows us is that kids use this knowledge of common syllables and morphemes to decode new words when they come across them. So not skipping them or guessing them, but like digging in to figuring out what that word really is. To remember the word for next time when they either need to read or write it in a future context. And to analogize from other words. If you know the word member, it's not that hard to figure out the word remember. And so knowing those word parts helps them make connections between words and support decoding in that way as well. So teaching common syllables as word chunks will help kids get sort of a running start with their decoding of multisyllabic words. This is a list of the most frequently occurring syllables in the English language. We teach high frequency words, and we teach high frequency vowel teams and patterns. So teaching high frequency syllables is another way of supporting that explicit decoding strategy that we want kids to use when they come across new words. You see, if kids know the word, that the syllable X, for example, that'll help them get started on dozens and dozens of words, and recognize that word part, and speed their decoding and their reading confidence. But we also want to teach morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful word parts. And the great thing about morphemes is that they can be multisyllabic themselves. So semi and auto, for example, are examples of morphemes or word parts that kids can recognize that actually are more than one syllable. So that gives them a little bit more of a head start in decoding. So for example, the word semi-automation is 6 syllables, but only 4 morphemes. So if you know those morphemes, you're going to be able to take bigger chunks to support your decoding and figure out the word more quickly and easily. And the other great thing about morphemes is that they carry meaning. They are the smallest meaningful word parts, so that they not only help you figure out what the word is and how to pronounce it, but also if it's a new vocabulary, what it might mean, and how it might be related to other words. There are 3 main types of morphemes that kids need to learn. One are called unbound or free morphemes, and this is what we think of as like the base word, or it could be a word on its own. So popular, truck, read, those are all free morphemes. To those base words or free morphemes, we can add either inflection morphemes, which tend to change the tense or the number, or derivational morphemes, which can change the part of speech or the meaning of the word. And these are where things get really tricky, because a lot of prefixes and suffixes actually change the meaning of the word completely. Like in or dis often means that the word means the opposite of what it means. So for example, disinformation is the opposite of information. Disobedience is the opposite of obedience. So being able to know that really supports kids in their ability to not only recognize the word, but also figure out what it means. And research shows that instruction that includes morphology supports multisyllabic word recognition, vocabulary, and comprehension growth for students. So once kids have a good grounding and get some of these pieces, these high frequency syllables and morphemes, we want to teach them a routine for using those pieces to decode these longer words during reading. We want to make sure that when they're reading a new text and enjoying themselves, that they aren't skipping over those words, but actually slowing down and making sense of them as they go. And there's a number of routines that have been developed by researchers over the years. I'm in a project right now where we're trying to fine-tune one for 4th and 5th graders. But probably the best researched routine out there right now was by O'Connor and colleagues, and they call it every syllable has at least one vowel. So that's like reminding kids that you need to have one vowel in every syllable. And they suggest having kids underline all the vowels in a long word, join vowel teams into one vowel sound, identify any familiar word parts, figure out how many word parts you're working with, and then break the word into parts for decoding and try to pronounce the whole word at once. There are other variations of this out there. Some curricula have their own. I've seen some school districts come up with infographics that show like kids slicing and dicing the word like in a kitchen. It's there's not one way to do this, but this is one. But really any strategy that helps kids break the words into syllables and then pronounce them will support them. So here's an example of how this might work. If you're reading the Jupiter text that we've looked at before, and you come across the word rotation, what you can do first is underline all of the vowels and look for vowel teams, right? So we've got R, A, and I-O. I-O is tricky because it's not really a vowel team that shows up in very many places. Usually when you see I-O in words like Rio, it's actually 2 different vowel sounds. So that's a little bit hard to figure out. So this word either has 3 or 4 syllables, I'm not sure yet. this is where my knowledge of morphemes really comes in handy, because shun is a very common suffix. So if I've gotten some instruction in recognizing common prefixes and suffixes, this word part will help me a lot. Shun is, like I said, appears at the ends of words like information and communication and transportation. It's very, very common in English. But it is pronounced in a very strange way. If I was trying to sound this out letter by letter, I would probably get tion rather than shun. But because I recognize this word part, I know that I-O are making just one vowel sound here, and I can pronounce the T like an SH. So once I've identified that known word part, I know I'm only working with 3 syllables, and it becomes much easier for me to break the word into parts and sound it out. Rotation. Now I've paid attention to all the parts in the word and the sounds that go with those parts. So I've figured out how to pronounce it, and I'm much, much more likely to recognize it the next time I encounter it in a text. So teaching kids a routine for you, once kids have that, some knowledge of syllables and morphemes and a routine for decoding multisyllabic words, the next thing that they need to do is just read lots and lots and lots of words. So we're going to talk about one research-based strategy to improve text volume, which is using text sets to increase word learning and word learning opportunities. But really, any strategy to increase text volume is going to help kids encounter more words and learn more words. But for example, the reason this is so important, when we go back to the example of rotation, we can kind of figure out what this means from just the word parts, right? Shun is a suffix that means the state of being. So rotation means the state of rotating or being rotated. Okay. But what if I don't really know what rotating means? I sort of know, but I don't really know. Or what if I don't know what it means in this context, right? There are words that have different meanings in different contexts. So we really need to be reading these words in meaningful books, in context, to really solidify that word learning and build up our understanding of all the different meanings a word can have. So in this case, back to our Jupiter text, you'll see that there's a really great context clue to support the meaning of rotation in an astronomical context as opposed to a different context. It only takes 10 hours for Jupiter to spin around its axis. So in this case, in a planetary sense, rotation means to spin around its axis. You wouldn't get that from just working with that word in isolation. It's the meaningful context of the book that helps that word learning really click into place. And this is what's missing from a lot of English language arts curricula. A lot of English language arts curricula do provide some instruction in common syllables and multisyllabic word learning, but they're almost always working with words in isolation. And they're using perfect examples to illustrate the syllabication rules that they want kids to learn. And this is a good start. I mean, absolutely, you can build on this in your multisyllabic decoding instruction, but it's not going to be enough to really build rich word learning. Oftentimes what I see is even in 4th or 5th grade, almost all of these words in the in ELA curricula are 2-syllable words. And in fact, and as we can see, as soon as we get into an interesting book that kids might want to learn from, we have 3-syllable words, 4-syllable words. And so that's it. You're reading words in context and figuring out how to apply what you're learning about words in actual books is missing from a lot of ELA curriculum. There's also research that shows that teaching kids a lot of rules about syllables and how to divide words into syllables is not the best way to support them with actual reading. Devin Kearns, again at UConn, did a study where he analyzed all the words in the English language, or like in a large, not all the words, but like all the words in a large corpus of English text. And he found that the most commonly taught syllabication rules in ELA curricula don't actually work once we get into these longer words. They work pretty well. They work 78% of the time or 50% of the time for words for short words, 2-syllable words. But once we get into words that have 3 or more syllables, they're actually anti-helpful for figuring out how to read those words. And there's also some additional research from from people who study multilingual learners and also people who study children who speak multiple dialects, that have found that teaching kids a lot of extra rules can actually add to the cognitive load of reading and get in the way of just like getting into a book and enjoying it and learning words from the text. So it's not bad to do this word learning, but you want to make sure you're supplementing what this sort of syllabication instruction that you might get in your curricula with lots and lots of opportunities to read real words in real books. Kids need this word reading instruction, but they often need a little bit more than they're getting provided in schools, and they need lots and lots of opportunities to practice and read words in real text. And this is particularly true over the summer. Dick Allington's research has estimated that almost all of the reading achievement gap between high income and low income students can be attributed to what he calls summer reading loss, where some kids get practice reading over the summer and some kids don't. So the more reading kids can do, the more they'll be able to apply what they're learning and make sense of it. But one more strategy from research that I wanted to highlight to increase reading volume is what Sarah Lupo calls text sets. And this is when you take a challenging target text that you want kids to read, maybe from a history or a social studies or a science textbook, and you pair it with other texts that are a little bit more accessible and motivating in order to get kids into the topic and exposed to the same vocabulary words in multiple contexts. So you might start with a challenging text and then pair it with a video or something else to build background knowledge. And then some informational text that build up that background knowledge, and then an accessible text to ensure that kids can read something successfully on their own and practice their own reading skills before you put them into something that might be challenging, especially for struggling readers. And the idea is that all of these texts would be on the same topic. So you would encounter the word rotation in multiple books and and both easier and harder texts. So you would really be building up your reading vocabulary before you got to the challenging text. And you might also have opportunities to connect rotation to rotating to rotated, and compare and contrast it with revolution, which is another astronomy term, so that by the time you get to that hard text, you've really built up your reading muscles and you feel very confident and motivated to learn more about this topic. And books like Jupiter from the high interest decodable chapter books are perfect for including these text sets, right? Because they have these challenging words, but they are built into really accessible, exciting text that can get kids excited about a topic. So this is an important way to do this in the classroom. And also, but remember, this is just one strategy for increasing text volume and the opportunities kids get to read real words in real texts. So that's all I have for today. I'm happy to turn it over to Sarah and answer questions that have come up.
Oh my gosh, Laura, I was listening to you and thinking about how much we put time into. I'm gonna just pull up a little bit about our product, because I feel like a big part of what you're talking about, we put so much thought into. Like when I looked at your last part there, when you talked about text sets and trying to give that background knowledge, right? The Sarah Lupo thought process. Every single one of our books has a video that goes along with it, that walks you through the phonics work you're going to be doing, either multisyllabic or not, right, for those big kids, but also kind of like a little bit of background knowledge on Jupiter. So this was something we put in because we knew that people had told us the kids need background knowledge, but it's so nice to hear that Sarah Lupo has thought about that deeply.
Yeah, well, and kids can get into this background knowledge thing is an important part of the science of reading as well, but it becomes circular, right? If you need background knowledge to read and you build background knowledge by reading, you need an entry point. And so the text sets are one way to provide an entry point, but high interest books that kids can read on their own, even if they're struggling readers, is another great entry point.
But it sounds like a little bit of what you're talking about. We thought through both, right? When you say text sets, you mean genres that fulfill or something that groups things together. So for us, that's like the planet books, that's like mystery books like that. It's like that series that you're walking into, right? As you think of the text sets. And then coupled that along with the video allows it to be super successful for those big kids.
Yeah, and well, and one of the things that I like is that you do have these series on topics. So if a kids in third to fifth grade get really into a topic and just want to read everything about it. And so if they get into planets, there's like a whole bunch of books about planets that they can read.
I love also like we thought a lot about what words we were using. So it's so nice to hear that by hitting those multisyllabic, you're going to hit it. Like it's going to be successful.
Yeah, yeah. And you want books, especially for kids who are, struggling readers or are just starting to do this multisyllabic work, a combination, some hard words embedded with a lot of familiar words is just the right balance.
So also in each of our videos, we kind of go through for you, like, here's something that we know is different for you. Here's a new word so that you can like walk through that ahead of time. The other thing that I heard you talk about that I feel so great and so almost validated in our work, right, is like we think we are all trying to eliminate summer slide for kids. The last thing we want is that everyone has done all this great work and now kids are going to go into the summer. So we have thought through what we're calling take-home decodable packs. And I would kind of like, I'm going to walk through and then I would love you to talk a little bit about it because we thought through the research behind it, but it's so nice to hear it always, right? We give you 10, like districts send us their reading data. Like Columbus is going to send us their data for students in Columbus, Ohio, based upon all their readers. We're going to then match them up with 10 science or reading decodables that are exactly meant for them. Now, we base this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too, on Paul von Hippel's research. He said for the summer, kids should actually get a little bit easier books because we don't need to introduce anything new over the summer. We literally just want to support them to keep going and doing that work that they already know they have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can read harder text, and the text, the text sets are really designed around what you wouldn't be doing in the classroom, but you can read harder text in a classroom if you're there to support them. At home, you do not want them getting frustrated. You want them reading text that they can apply what they've been learning and get lots and lots of reps in. It's almost like learning to run, right? You just want them to get lots of miles in. They don't need to like do, to be learning new skills necessarily, but they're still building up those reading muscles just from encountering lots and lots of words and text.
Which is so a little bit of what you're talking about, those reps and those laps, we designed our take-home decodables that on the back of each of them, we want you to read them 5 times. And what we're also suggesting is that you read one, go through all 10, and then start them all again, right? Because a little bit of those reps and that repetition is what we want for kids. I guess is that would say, that's a little bit of what you would say to design it around that.
Absolutely. And again, I think that what's so important is that these are connected text. We are doing better, I think, in many places at teaching phonics and some multisyllabic decoding even, but it's almost always like on the board, words in isolation. And if they don't get this practice in meaningful text, then it's not going to stick. And so it's really important for them to get this reading practice, especially over the summer, but during the school year as well.
You know what's so nice about what you're saying though, but we've put thought into like when we're sending you these 10 science reading decodable books, we're doing them based around the work that you either need to do or like you need to solidify. So a lot of the same words they're going to see, they're getting interactions with the same kind of, if it's 3rd to 5th graders, those high interest, those multisyllabic, right? But if you're an emerging reader, it's even in a lower grade, you're getting those words that you've like are the same kind of words again and again and again, which is basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, the same types of words, and also this, seeing the same spelling patterns in different words is really important, but also like even just encountering the same word multiple times, because remember, it doesn't have just one meaning, right? It's going to have different meanings in different contexts. So encountering those words in books where you can gain that context is going to be more powerful than just learning it on a board or looking at it on a flashcard.
So we wrap these all, Laura, a little bit for that motivation. You didn't get to talk about, I'm sure I missed it, the 3rd to 5th graders like motivation, right? Because these are the most disenfranchised students we know as they are learners. So we actually were super intentional of wrapping it for every single kid, even these older children, because they need to re-engage and like see it, right? Talk me through kind of what you would say for the motivation for these older kids.
Well, first of all, what we know from research is that motivation is a cycle with skill, right? So kids need to be building, the more motivated kids read more because they feel good about it. And then as a result, their skills improve and they feel more motivated. So the key thing is to get kids on the right side of that cycle, right? We want them to be reading having success, understanding that they're good at it, and then being motivated to do it again, right? So it's this like virtuous cycle. And so that's a really big part of it. Like you can enter that cycle anywhere. You can enter it by motivating them with by providing them with books that are really interesting to them, that show them that they can learn new things from text. And then that'll help support their skill development, but also by supporting their skill development, it will make them motivated to read more. So it's kind of like it's like a win-win, basically, if you're
we'll take both. We'll wrap it so they get excited, and we'll give them books that they can read. So they like, it's almost like we're trying to hit motivation from like every perspective, right?
Right. We're trying to get the whole cycle going and keep it going over the summer.
And then, Fort Bend School District told us, they were like, Sarah, we really want a backpack so they can take it anywhere they go to like keep themselves reading. So like we even added in this tiny little part that's like, it's almost there's no research around it, right? But it leads into the motivation and the ease of reading is a little bit of what you're talking about too.
Yeah, there's no research that I know about backpacks, but this is what I always tell parents is that, you just have a book with you everywhere so that when they're bored, they say you're bored, don't hand them the phone, hand them a book, right? And so having those books available for those like, boring moments where you're just like waiting for your brother to finish baseball practice or whatever is like a great opportunity to build those skills.
I love it. What's so great about what you're talking about is it really just, it validates all of those districts that have made the huge purchase of buying the take homes for summer, is they've just done something so research-based, so good for kids to like, the best thing you could do for kids over the summer is 1, give them books, 2, give them books that are right, that match them and match the text set that they need, 3, hit that motivation, and 4, just like make it easy to keep reading. So when they come back to school, right? That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, giving them a steady diet of books that they can read and that they will enjoy reading. That's the other thing, is I know that these are carefully designed to be engaging. That's going to be a huge part of it. Is if they don't enjoy it and they're not in school, they're not going to read it, right? So that's a big part of it too, is designing books that are really age appropriate and interesting for kids all the way through the elementary grades.
I love that you said that. We put a lot of thought and attention into like even having the beautiful pictures and those illustrations like that. I feel like we shouldn't discount having books that matter to kids, or personal to kids, and engage them with just like the most simplest idea of like beautiful pictures and stories that they want to read, right?
And kids are still even in the digital era, kids are still very motivated by physical books. Like holding a book and feeling like they can read it is a real milestone for a lot of kids.
I heard you two talk about like, we made our 3rd to 5th grade books bigger, and like it's super intentional, right? Because while we want them to fit into the hands of, for the younger kids, the older kids need books that like are bigger and make them feel different.
They make them feel like they're reading big kid books, and also that are on topics that are interesting to them. Like this 3rd to 5th grade age is when they get really, really into like learning about particular topics, right? Yeah. Like so for some kids it's sports, for some kids it's planets, for some kids it's dinosaurs. And so having books that informational books that are high quality and can really teach them new things about the world is something that is very motivating for these older kids.
I love it. The last part of our take homes is that Ray Ritzel really made us like think about reading writing connection. So for the take homes of the high interest, they're based around syllables, right? But here in the lower grades, they're based around kind of like those the words they're working on, and some letter sounds based around that. I love it. Laura, what else do you think? I'm trying to like, hold on, let me stop sharing now. So we just love that we get to do these take homes for the summer for everyone. And I'm going to look and see, because I bet you have some questions. Are there any questions out there for Laura? I wrote down, I have my pen in my hand, because everything you said, I was kind of loving. We need to actually probably add in some like work around, some pre-work into our product around the syllables. I think a little bit of what I'm hearing you say that.
Yeah, I mean, like I did look through, I have looked through the high interest chapter books, and they do have those like good words. Like I actually had several other examples, but I cut them for time of keywords that they would really benefit from practicing with over the course of the summer or in class. So there are some good words, and what I like is that there aren't too many hard words, right? When there's too many hard words, then kids kind of get overwhelmed. But there's like just enough that they could realistically stop, apply a routine, figure out what the word is, and then keep reading and making sense of the text.
I love it. Let's just give kids books. Let's keep them reading, and reading what's right for them, I think, is a huge part too, right? So for those kids that need to do the syllable work, let's give them text sets that match them and are engaging for them, and allow them to practice all those syllable words. All right. Well, Dr. Tortorelli, I loved this. We can't wait to have you back. And for everyone, join us at our next symposium. It's just so fun to listen and talk to all these fabulous researchers out there. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.